The crystal wine glasses sparkled under my dining room chandelier as Jessica poured Merlot for her mother Linda, their laughter echoing through my own home. Thanksgiving dinner plates sat abandoned while Jessica acted like the gracious hostess in my house. When she turned to me with that practiced smile and commanded me to handle the dishes while everyone continued celebrating, something inside me snapped. I had spent 40 years building this home, raising my son David in these rooms, and now I was being treated like hired help. The conversation flowed around me, as if I had become invisible furniture. I untied my apron, placed it carefully on the granite countertop, and walked straight out my front door. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, sitting in my driveway, staring at the house where warm light spilled from every window. The voices inside continued their cheerful chatter, completely unaware that the woman who had prepared their feast had vanished. I drove through the quiet streets of our suburban neighborhood, past houses where other families gathered for their own Thanksgiving celebrations, until I found myself at Greenwood Cemetery. The headstone read Thomas Mitchell Cartwright, beloved husband and father. I knelt on the cold ground beside Tom's grave, my knees pressing into the November earth. "I don't know what's happening to our family," I whispered to the granite marker. "David's changed since he married Jessica. She treats me like I'm some burden instead of his mother." Tom had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over tensions with his gentle humor. If he were alive, Jessica would never dare treat me this way. I traced his name with my finger, remembering how he used to say that respect was earned but kindness was freely given. Tonight, I had received neither. After 3 hours of sitting with Tom's memory, I drove back home. The porch light was on, but something felt different. I unlocked my front door and stepped into chaos. The living room furniture had been rearranged completely. My antique china cabinet, the one Tom's grandmother had given us as a wedding gift, now sat against the opposite wall. Family photographs I didn't recognize hung where my own pictures had been displayed for decades. "Where have you been?" David appeared in the hallway, his face flushed from wine. "Jessica was worried sick about you." Worried sick. The woman who had just commanded me to clean up after her guests was supposedly worried about my well-being. I walked into my kitchen and stopped cold. My beautiful Thanksgiving leftovers were gone. The turkey I had brined for 24 hours and roasted to golden perfection had been scraped into the garbage disposal. The stuffing made from my mother's recipe, the cranberry sauce I had prepared from scratch, all of it discarded to make room for a store-bought apple pie still in its plastic container. Jessica needed refrigerator space for dessert, David explained, following my horrified gaze. Her mom brought pie from the bakery. "I spent 3 days preparing that meal," I said quietly, my voice barely containing the rage building inside my chest. "That turkey would have fed us for a week." "Mom, you just disappeared without any explanation," David continued, his tone suggesting I was the unreasonable one. "One minute you were here, the next minute Jessica found your apron on the counter and you were gone. We didn't know if something had happened to you." I stared at my son, this 35-year-old man who had once brought me dandelions from the backyard and insisted they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. When had he become someone who watched his wife discard his mother's cooking without protest? "Where are Jessica and Linda now?" I asked. "Upstairs. Jessica wanted to show her mom your guest room. She's thinking about redecorating it." My guest room. The space I had carefully decorated with antique quilts and vintage furniture, where Tom and I had dreamed of hosting our grandchildren someday. I climbed the stairs, my legs feeling heavy with each step. I found them in my bedroom, not the guest room. Jessica was pulling items from my dresser drawers while Linda sat on my bed, rifling through the jewelry box Tom had given me on our 25th anniversary. "What are you doing?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Jessica looked up with that same practiced smile, holding a stack of my sweaters. "I was looking for extra blankets for my mom. She gets cold at night. I hope you don't mind that I went through your things." She hoped I didn't mind. In my own bedroom, a woman I had welcomed into my family was going through my most personal belongings, and she hoped I wouldn't mind. Linda held up my pearl necklace, The one Tom had surprised me with for our anniversary dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. "These are lovely, Rosemary," Linda said, not bothering to put them back. "Jessica has such good taste in jewelry, too. Have you seen the diamond earrings David bought her?" I looked around my bedroom, seeing it through different eyes. The family photos on my nightstand had been moved. My favorite reading lamp had been relocated to the opposite corner. Even my bedside table had been rearranged. My books stacked differently. My reading glasses moved to an unfamiliar spot. This wasn't the first time Jessica had taken liberties with my home. Over the past 6 months, I had noticed small changes. The guest room had been slowly transformed, my carefully chosen decorations replaced with Jessica's modern preferences. My garden plants had mysteriously died after Jessica offered to water them while I visited my sister. My newspaper subscription had been canceled because Jessica thought I was too old to need daily news. Each incident by itself seemed minor, easily explained away by Jessica's helpful nature or David's desire to support his wife. But standing in my violated bedroom, watching this woman and her mother treat my possessions like their own, the pattern became crystal clear. "I think you should both go now," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Mom," David appeared in the doorway. "Jessica's just trying to help. You know how thoughtful she is." Thoughtful. The word hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. I watched my son defend his wife's invasion of my privacy, and something fundamental shifted between us. The unconditional trust I had always felt for David began to crack. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call that shattered what remained of my peaceful world. Catherine Williams, from First National Bank, spoke with the careful professionalism of someone delivering bad news. "Mrs. Cartwright, I'm calling about some unusual activity on your checking account. We've had 3 large withdrawals in the past 2 weeks that don't match your normal spending patterns." My coffee cup trembled in my hands. "What kind of withdrawals?" $1,000 from Romano's Italian restaurant, $800 from Nordstrom department store, and $1,500 from something called Luxury Day Spa and Salon. The transactions were all made with your debit card, but the signature doesn't quite match our records. Romano's was the upscale restaurant downtown where Jessica had mentioned having lunch with her college friends. Nordstrom was her favorite shopping destination. I had never set foot in a luxury spa in my life. "Can you show me security footage of these transactions?" "Of course, Mrs. Cartwright. We have everything ready for your review. Can you come in this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, watching grainy black and white footage of Jessica using my debit card with the confidence of someone who had done this before. In one video, she laughed with the restaurant hostess while signing my name. In another, she tried on expensive handbags at Nordstrom, using my card to purchase a purse that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "How did she get my card?" I asked, though the sick feeling in my stomach already provided the answer. Catherine pulled out additional papers. "We also need to discuss these." She handed me copies of bank statements I had never seen. "Someone has been intercepting your mail and opening a second checking account using your social security number." My hands shook as I examined the statements. Hundreds of small withdrawals, cash advances, and online purchases I knew nothing about. Hotel charges in cities I had never visited. Online shopping sprees for clothes that would never fit my 70-year-old body. Restaurant bills for meals I had never eaten. "This has been going on for 4 months, Catherine continued. "We should have caught it sooner. But the person doing this was very clever about staying just under our fraud detection limits." I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from the scope of Jessica's betrayal. When I arrived, David's car was in my driveway. I found him in my kitchen with Jessica, both of them looking serious. "Mom, we need to talk," David said before I could speak. "Jessica and I are concerned about you." Concerned, another word that meant something completely different when Jessica used it. "Your behavior yesterday was really worrying," Jessica added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Disappearing like that, not telling anyone where you were going. We think you might be having some memory problems." Memory problems. I stared at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had been systematically stealing my money, and she was suggesting I had cognitive issues. I went to the bank today, I said quietly. They showed me some interesting security footage. Jessica's face didn't change, but I noticed her fingers tighten around her coffee cup. David looked confused. What kind of footage? He asked. Footage of Jessica, using my debit card, at Romano's restaurant in Nordstrom. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Jessica recovered first, her expression shifting to one of wounded innocence. Rosemary, you gave me permission to use your card for those things. Don't you remember? You said you wanted to treat my friends to lunch, and you insisted on buying me that purse for my birthday. I stared at her, amazed by the smoothness of her lie. I never said any of those things. You did, Mom, David interjected, and my heart sank. I was there when you offered to pay for Jessica's birthday gift. You said you wanted to do something special for her. The betrayal cut deeper than Jessica's theft. My own son was lying to support his wife's crimes. Or worse, he actually believed her version of events. David, I never had that conversation with you. See what I mean? Jessica said softly to David, as if I couldn't hear her. She doesn't remember things anymore. Yesterday she forgot where she put her apron. Today, she doesn't remember giving me permission to use her card. I watched this performance with growing horror. Jessica was rewriting history, creating a narrative where I was the confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own memories. And David was accepting every word. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Harrison about this, David suggested. Get Mom evaluated for early dementia. Dementia. The word hit me like a physical blow. They were going to use my supposed mental incompetence to explain away Jessica's theft, to justify whatever other plans they had made for my future. There's more, I said, pulling out the bank statements Catherine had given me. Someone has been intercepting my mail and opening accounts in my name. Jessica examined the papers with the perfect blend of concern and confusion. Rosemary, this is exactly what I've been worried about. Identity theft is so common with seniors who aren't careful about their personal information. Are you suggesting someone stole my identity? It happens all the time, Jessica continued, especially when people start having memory issues and aren't as careful as they used to be. You probably threw away some important papers without thinking about it. I watched Jessica twist my discovery of her crimes into evidence of my incompetence. Every fact became proof of my declining mental state. Every question I asked became a symptom of confusion. She was gaslighting me with surgical precision, and my son was her willing accomplice. I think we should contact the police, I said. Mom, the police can't help with memory problems, David replied gently, but Dr. Harrison can. Let me make you an appointment. They left an hour later, Jessica expressing her deep concern for my well-being, and David promising to schedule medical evaluations. I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of financial fraud, listening to my family discuss my mental health like I was already incompetent. As evening fell, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My spare house keys, the ones I kept in the kitchen drawer for emergencies, were missing. I searched every drawer, every cabinet, every possible location. The keys were gone, somewhere in the city. Jessica had copies of my house keys. She could come and go as she pleased, take what she wanted, plant evidence of my supposed incompetence. My home, my sanctuary for 40 years, was no longer secure. That night, I lay awake, listening to every small sound, wondering if Jessica was using my keys to enter my house while I slept. The woman who was stealing my money and poisoning my son against me now had unlimited access to my life. Tuesday morning, I announced to David that I needed to run errands and wouldn't be home until afternoon. Instead, I parked 3 blocks away and walked back through my neighbor's yard, letting myself in through my back door. If Jessica had been watching my routine, she would think the house was empty. I positioned myself in my pantry, where I could see into the living room, but remain hidden behind the door. Within an hour, I heard the front door open, and familiar voices filled my home. The market value is probably around $450,000, a woman's voice said. I didn't recognize her, but she spoke with the crisp authority of a real estate professional. That's what we figured, Jessica replied. The location is perfect, and Rosemary has kept everything in excellent condition. I pressed myself against the pantry wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they would hear it. Through the crack in the door, I could see Jessica, Linda, and a professionally dressed woman examining my living room like they were shopping for furniture. How quickly could we list it? Linda asked. That depends on the legal situation, the real estate agent replied. You mentioned there might be competency issues with the current owner. Jessica nodded gravely. My mother-in-law is developing dementia. Shay's becoming increasingly confused about financial matters, forgetting conversations, making poor decisions. Yesterday, she accused me of stealing her debit card, even though she gave me permission to use it. The casual way Jessica lied about my mental state made my stomach turn. She spoke about my supposed dementia like it was an established medical fact rather than a fiction she had created. Well, need documentation from her physician, the agent continued. Court-ordered competency evaluations, power of attorney paperwork, that sort of thing. Already in progress, Linda said with satisfaction. We have a doctor who understands the situation. Has been documenting her decline for months. My hands trembled as I processed what I was hearing. They had a doctor documenting my supposed mental decline for months, but I had only seen Dr. Harrison once in the past year, for my routine physical in March. When had he been documenting anything about my mental state? The tricky part will be timing, Jessica continued. David is still somewhat protective of his mother. He's not completely on board with moving her to a facility yet. Men can be sentimental about these things, the agent observed. But once he sees the financial benefits, he'll come around. $450,000 is a lot of money. I watched Jessica nod in agreement. Especially since we're expecting our first child. David knows we'll need the money for the baby's future. A baby. Jessica wasn't pregnant when we had Thanksgiving dinner 4 days ago. She wasn't showing any signs of pregnancy, wasn't experiencing morning sickness, wasn't making any of the lifestyle changes expectant mothers typically made. Either this was a very recent development or another lie designed to manipulate David. What about the old woman's other assets? Linda asked. Bank accounts, investments, insurance policies. She's got about $80,000 in savings and a life insurance policy worth $200,000, Jessica replied, plus some antique furniture and jewelry that might be valuable. How did Jessica know the details of my insurance policy? I had never discussed my life insurance with anyone except my attorney and the insurance company. The implications made me feel sick. Once we have legal guardianship, we can liquidate everything, Linda continued. The nursing home costs will eat up most of her savings anyway, so it's better if we manage her assets responsibly. Nursing home. They were planning to put me in a nursing home and steal my entire life savings. I listened in horror as they discussed my future like I was already dead. What's the timeline? The agent asked. 2 weeks, Jessica said confidently. Dr. Harrison is finishing the competency evaluation this week. Our lawyer thinks we can have her declared incompetent by next Friday. And if she resists... Linda's voice turned cold. Confused elderly people have accidents all the time. Falls downstairs, medication mix-ups, getting lost and wandering into traffic. Very sad. But these things happen. The air left my lungs. They weren't just planning to steal my money and my house. They were talking about arranging my death if I interfered with their scheme. Mom! David's voice came from the front door. Jessica? What's going on? I heard him enter the living room, and the tone of the conversation shifted dramatically. David, thank goodness you're here, Jessica said warmly. This is Sarah Mitchell from Pinnacle Real Estate. I thought we should get a professional opinion about your mother's house value, just in case we need to sell it to pay for her care. I told you I'm not ready to talk about selling Mom's house, David replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Honey, we need to be practical, Jessica continued. The doctor says her condition is deteriorating rapidly, and with the baby coming, we'll need financial security. Baby. Jessica was using a pregnancy to manipulate David into betraying me. I watched through the door crack as she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. I know this is hard, she whispered. But we have to think about our family's future. Your mother needs professional care that we can't provide. David's resistance crumbled before my eyes. The mention of a grandchild, the suggestion that he was being a good father by securing his family's financial future, the implication that keeping me at home was selfish. Jessica had found his weakness and exploited it perfectly. How much would the house sell for? He asked Sarah. $450,000, possibly more with the right marketing, she replied. It's a beautiful property in an excellent neighborhood. I watched my son calculate the money in his head. $450,000, plus my savings, plus my life insurance. Enough to pay off any debts, buy a larger house, secure his unborn child's college fund. All he had to do was let them declare me incompetent and take everything I had worked my entire life to build. What would happen to Mom? David asked quietly. She'd be much better off in a specialized facility, Jessica assured him. Professional care, people trained to handle dementia patients, social activities with other residents. She'd be happier there than staying in this big house all alone, getting confused and scared. They made my future imprisonment sound like a vacation resort. I listened to Jessica paint a picture of my supposed mental deterioration, describing symptoms I had never exhibited and behaviors I had never displayed. She was so convincing that I almost believed her myself. The meeting ended with David agreeing to think about their proposal. Sarah left her business card and promised to prepare listing documents within the week. Linda kissed Jessica goodbye and reminded her to take care of the doctor situation. After they left, I remained hidden in my pantry for another hour, too shaken to move. When I finally emerged, my house felt different. The walls that had sheltered me for 40 years now seemed fragile and temporary. The furniture I had chosen with love and care was nothing more than inventory to be liquidated. I was no longer the mistress of my own home. I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, a source of money to be tapped, and I had exactly 2 weeks before they put their plan into motion. Thursday morning, I called Dr. Harrison's office and scheduled an emergency appointment. Margaret, his receptionist for the past 15 years, squeezed me in during his lunch break. I had been seeing Dr. Harrison since Tom and I moved to the neighborhood 20 years ago. He had delivered both my grandchildren's physicals when they visited, had treated my pneumonia 3 winters ago, had held my hand when Tom's cancer diagnosis came back terminal. If anyone could help me prove my mental competency, it would be Dr. Harrison. His office felt different when I arrived. Margaret seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact as she checked me in. The waiting room was empty, except for an elderly man reading a magazine with shaking hands. Dr. Harrison will see you now, Margaret said softly, leading me down the familiar hallway to his consultation room. Dr. Harrison looked up from his computer screen with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a tall, thin man in his early 60s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an intellectual appearance. Today, something about his demeanor felt rehearsed. Rosemary, how are you feeling today? He asked, not bothering to stand up. I'm concerned about some things that have been happening, I began. My family thinks I'm developing memory problems, but I feel fine. I was hoping you could run some tests to prove that my mind is still sharp. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, making notes on his computer. I see. And what makes your family think you're having cognitive issues? I explained the situation carefully, describing Jessica's accusations about forgotten conversations and misplaced items. I told him about the missing money from my bank account and how Jessica claimed I had given her permission to use my debit card. Financial confusion is often one of the first signs of dementia, Dr. Harrison said. Many patients become suspicious of family members, believing their loved ones are stealing from them. But I have bank statements showing unauthorized transactions. I protested, pulling out the papers Catherine had given me. Jessica used my card at restaurants and stores I've never been to. Dr. Harrison barely glanced at the evidence. Rosemary, paranoid delusions about family members are very common in early-stage dementia. The mind creates false memories to explain confusion about missing time or forgotten conversations. I stared at him in disbelief. He was dismissing concrete evidence of fraud as symptoms of mental illness. Dr. Harrison, those bank records are real. The security footage shows Jessica using my card. Let me ask you some questions, he said, ignoring my protests. He pulled out a standard cognitive assessment form. What year is it? 2023. Who is the current president? Joe Biden. Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens? I completed his mental status exam perfectly, answering every question correctly, demonstrating clear thinking and perfect memory. When I finished, Dr. Harrison made more notes on his computer. The test results look good, he admitted. But cognitive decline can be episodic. You might be lucid now but confused later. Can you provide documentation that I passed these tests? I asked. Something I can show my family to prove I'm mentally competent. Dr. Harrison hesitated. Actually, Rosemary, I've been documenting some concerning symptoms over the past several months. My blood turned cold. What symptoms? I haven't been here since my physical in March. You've been calling the office frequently, asking repetitive questions about medications you're not taking, he said, reading from his computer screen. Margaret has documented multiple instances of confusion during phone conversations. I haven't called your office in 6 months, I said firmly. Margaret, can you verify this? But Margaret had disappeared from the reception area. Through the open door, I could see her desk was empty. You've also been asking about prescription drugs that don't exist, Dr. Harrison continued. Last week, you called asking about refills for medications I've never prescribed. The lies were so detailed and specific that for a moment I questioned my own memory. Had I made phone calls I didn't remember? Was it possible I was having episodes of confusion? Then reality reasserted itself. I kept a detailed calendar and phone log. I would have records of any calls to Dr. Harrison's office. Can I see Margaret's documentation of these phone calls? I asked. Patient privacy regulations prevent me from sharing staff notes, Dr. Harrison replied smoothly. I realized he was trapping me. Every request for evidence was met with policy excuses. Every symptom he described was impossible to disprove. He was creating a medical history of mental decline without any supporting evidence. Dr. Harrison, why are you lying about my mental state? His facade dropped for just a moment, and I saw something ugly flash across his face. Then the professional mask returned. Rosemary? This kind of accusatory behavior is another symptom of cognitive decline. Patients often become hostile toward medical professionals who document their deteriorating condition. Someone is paying you to falsify my records, I said quietly. Dr. Harrison stood up abruptly. I think we're done here. I'll be sending a report to your family about today's evaluation. I left his office feeling like I had just witnessed my own execution. Dr. Harrison was going to document our conversation as evidence of my paranoid delusions and hostile behavior. My attempt to prove my competency had been turned into further proof of my supposed mental decline. In my car, I called Margaret's direct line. She answered on the first ring. Margaret, this is Rosemary Cartwright. I need to ask you about the phone calls Dr. Harrison mentioned. Mrs. Cartwright, Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. I can't talk to you about this. Margaret, you've known me for 15 years. Have I ever called your office asking confused questions about medications? Silence stretched across the phone line. Finally, Margaret spoke so softly I could barely hear her. Mrs. Cartwright, someone has been calling pretending to be you, a woman with a similar voice, asking about prescription drugs and leaving rambling messages. Dr. Harrison told me to document these calls as coming from you. My heart stopped. Jessica has been impersonating me. I can't say any more, Margaret whispered. Dr. Harrison said I'd lose my job if I discussed patient records with anyone. The phone call ended, leaving me sitting in the medical center parking lot with the horrifying truth. Jessica had been calling Dr. Harrison's office, pretending to be me, creating a documented history of mental confusion. Dr. Harrison had been collaborating with her, turning these fake calls into medical evidence of my cognitive decline. But why would Dr. Harrison risk his medical license to help Jessica? What did she have on him that would make him participate in elder abuse and medical fraud? That evening, I drove past Dr. Harrison's house, in the affluent neighborhood where many of the city's medical professionals lived. His driveway was empty, but lights were on in his home office. I parked across the street and watched. At 9:30 p.m., a black sedan pulled into his driveway. Two men in expensive suits got out and approached his front door. Through his office window, I could see Dr. Harrison pacing nervously as he let them in. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. When the men left, Dr. Harrison stood in his doorway, looking defeated. One of the men handed him an envelope before they drove away. I followed the black sedan to a downtown hotel, where both men entered the lobby and disappeared into the elevator. The license plate was registered to a company called Midwest Financial Recovery Services. Back home, I researched the company online. Midwest Financial Recovery was a debt collection agency that specialized in gambling debts and high-interest loans. Their client list included several casinos and private lending organizations known for predatory practices. Dr. Harrison had gambling debts. Jessica was paying him to falsify my medical records, either directly or by helping him manage his financial problems. My trusted family physician was destroying my life to save his own. The medical conspiracy was even worse than I had imagined. Dr. Harrison wasn't just documenting false symptoms. He was actively participating in a fraud scheme that would leave me imprisoned in a nursing home while Jessica and David stole everything I owned. And in 1 week, he would provide the medical testimony needed to have me declared legally incompetent. Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit David at his apartment, unannounced. I needed to understand how deeply involved he was in Jessica's scheme, whether there was any chance of reaching the son I had raised, to be honest and compassionate. I used my spare key, the one he had given me for emergencies, and let myself into his downtown loft. I found his briefcase open on the dining room table, papers scattered across the surface like he had been studying them. What I saw made my knees buckle. Legal documents with my name on every page. Power of attorney forms already filled out, requiring only my signature. Commitment papers for involuntary psychiatric evaluation at Riverside Mental Health Facility. Financial statements detailing my assets down to the penny. Real estate transfer documents prepared to sell my house. But the most devastating discovery was a handwritten note in David's familiar script. Timeline. Mom's competency hearing, November 15th. Commitment to Riverside, November 16th. House listing, November 20th. Jessica's medical appointment, November 22nd. Medical appointment. I grabbed the calendar from David's kitchen counter and counted the dates. November 22nd was exactly 8 weeks from now. If Jessica was pregnant, November 22nd would be when she reached her first trimester. She wasn't pregnant yet. She was planning to get pregnant after they had stolen my money and sold my house. Mom, David's voice came from the hallway. What are you doing here? I turned around, still holding his handwritten timeline, and looked at my son like I was seeing him for the first time. He was wearing a casino t-shirt and smelled like cigarette smoke and alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly. I found your plans, I said quietly, holding up his notes. David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, anger, and finally, cold calculation. He walked to his kitchen island and poured himself a drink at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You weren't supposed to see those, he said finally. So you admit you're planning to have me committed against my will? David drank half his whiskey before answering. Mom, you're not thinking clearly anymore. Jessica and I are trying to help you. Help me by stealing my house and putting me in a mental institution. Help you by making sure you get proper care, David replied. But there was no conviction in his voice. I set his timeline on the counter and looked around his apartment with new eyes. Expensive electronics I knew he couldn't afford on his insurance adjuster salary. Designer clothes still bearing price tags. Empty bottles from top-shelf liquor brands scattered around his kitchen. "How much do you owe?" I asked. David's glass stopped halfway to his lips. "What? Gambling debts. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" The mask finally fell away completely. David set down his drink and laughed, a bitter sound devoid of any warmth. $78,000, he said. "To people who don't accept payment plans, so you decided to steal my life savings to cover your gambling debts." "I decided to access my inheritance before you waste it all on some nursing home," David corrected. "That money should come to me anyway. Dad would have wanted me to have it." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. He spoke about my death like an inevitable inconvenience, my assets like his rightful property. "Your father would be horrified by what you're doing." David's expression turned vicious. "Dad's dead because you insisted on driving that night. If you had let him drive home from dinner, he wouldn't have been hit by that drunk driver." The old wound reopened like it was fresh. Tom's death had been a random tragedy. A drunk driver running a red light, hitting the passenger side of our car where Tom was sitting. I had been the designated driver that night because Tom had enjoyed a glass of wine with dinner. The accident was not my fault, but for 3 years I had carried the guilt anyway. "You blame me for your father's death." "I blame you for a lot of things," David said, pouring another drink. "For babying me so much that I never learned to handle money responsibly. For making Dad work 2 jobs to support your expensive lifestyle. For getting old and becoming a burden when Jessica and I need to start our own family." I stared at this stranger who looked like my son but spoke with a cruelty I didn't recognize. When had David become someone who resented me for aging, who saw my existence as an obstacle to his happiness? "Jessica didn't brainwash me," he continued, reading my thoughts. "She just helped me realize that I've been taking care of you for years, and now it's time for you to take care of me." "Taking care of me? David, I live independently, pay my own bills, manage my own household. For now," David said. "But what happens when you really do get dementia? When you fall and break a hip? When you need round-the-clock care? I'll be stuck taking care of an elderly parent while trying to raise my own children. So you've decided to eliminate the problem by having me declared incompetent now." David shrugged. "Better to handle it on our terms than wait for a crisis." The phone on his counter rang, and David answered it on speaker, without checking the caller ID. A man's gravelly voice filled the apartment. "David, this is Frank Castellino. You missed your payment deadline." I watched my son's face go pale. "Frank, I told you I needed another week." "You've had 6 months of additional weeks," Frank replied. "My associates are getting impatient. They're talking about making a personal visit to explain the situation." "I'll have the money by next Friday," David said quickly. "Everything's already in motion." "It better be. Because if you don't pay us by Friday, we'll start collecting from your family members. Your mother has a nice house in Oakwood Heights, doesn't she?" The call ended, leaving us in silence. David wouldn't meet my eyes. "They've threatened me directly?" I asked. "Frank's people don't make idle threats," David said quietly. "If I don't pay them, they'll hurt you to get to me. So you decided to steal my money before they could." "I decided to solve both problems at once," David replied. "You get professional care in a secure facility. I pay off my debts. Everyone wins. Except I lose my freedom, my home, and my life savings." David finally looked at me directly. "Mom, you're 70 years old. How much life do you really have left? 5 years? 10 years? Why should you sit on $400,000 when I could use that money to build a future for my family?" The brutality of his logic took my breath away. David had reduced my remaining years to a mathematical equation where my life had less value than his debts. "Get out," he said suddenly. I have things to do before Monday. What happens Monday? Dr. Harrison submits his competency evaluation to the court, David replied. Judge Morrison reviews the case Tuesday morning. You'll be committed to Riverside by Wednesday afternoon. I picked up his timeline from the counter, folding it carefully and putting it in my purse. Evidence of their conspiracy, written in David's own handwriting. You're making a mistake, I said as I walked toward his door. No, Mom, David called after me. I'm finally fixing one. I left my son's apartment understanding that he was no longer the child I had raised. Gambling addiction, financial pressure, and Jessica's manipulation had transformed him into someone who could plan his own mother's imprisonment with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. David wasn't Jessica's victim. He was her willing partner, motivated not by love for his wife, but by greed for my money and resentment over imagined grievances. He had convinced himself that I deserved to be betrayed because I was old, because I had failed him as a mother, because I was standing between him and financial freedom. In 3 days, my own son would testify in court that I was mentally incompetent. In 4 days, I would be locked in a psychiatric facility while they liquidated my entire life. And David would sleep peacefully, knowing he had solved his gambling problem by destroying the woman who had given him life. Monday morning, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and listening to the news while David, Jessica, Dr. Harrison, and their corrupt lawyer prepared for my competency hearing. They had no idea that for the past 3 weeks, I had been 10 steps ahead of them. The first call I made was to Agent Patricia Coleman of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. She arrived at my house within 2 hours, along with Agent Marcus Torres and a federal prosecutor named Sarah Chen Mrs. Cartwright. Agent Coleman said as she set up recording equipment on my dining room table, "We've been investigating Dr. Harrison for medical fraud for 6 months. Your case is exactly the evidence we needed to build a prosecution." I had contacted the FBI the day after my visit to Dr. Harrison's office. When I realized the scope of the conspiracy against me, my military intelligence training from the 1970s had taught me how to document evidence and build a case. Skills I thought I would never need again had become the tools for my survival. "Show them everything," I said, pulling out 3 thick folders I had prepared. The first folder contained financial records documenting Jessica's theft, bank statements, security camera footage, receipts, and transaction logs that proved she had been systematically stealing from me for months. Catherine Williams from First National Bank had been cooperating with the FBI investigation, providing additional evidence of the unauthorized account Jessica had opened using my identity. The second folder held recordings. For the past 2 weeks, I had been wearing a small digital recorder during every interaction with David, Jessica, Dr. Harrison, and Linda. I had captured their conversations about selling my house, their discussions of my supposed mental decline, and their plans to have me committed. The third folder contained the most damaging evidence: Jessica's medical fraud scheme. Working with a retired police detective my neighbor had recommended, I had discovered that Jessica was running similar scams against 3 other elderly women in the county. Dr. Harrison had been falsifying medical records for all of them, documenting fictional cognitive decline to support involuntary commitment proceedings. "We've been building cases against all 4 victims," Agent Torres explained, "but we needed someone on the inside who could gather direct evidence. You've given us everything we need." Agent Coleman opened her laptop and showed me surveillance footage I had never seen before. "We've been monitoring Jessica's activities since you first contacted us. This is from last Tuesday." The video showed Jessica entering a mail service business downtown, using fake identification to intercept mail addressed to me. She had been stealing my bank statements, insurance documents, and Social Security correspondence for months. "We also have this," Agent Torres added, showing me more footage of Jessica meeting with Dr. Harrison in the parking garage of his medical building. Money changed hands, and Dr. Harrison passed Jessica a manila envelope. "What was in the envelope?" I asked. "Blank prescription forms and patient record templates," Agent Coleman replied. "Jessica has been creating medical documentation to support Dr. Harrison's false reports about your mental state. The scope of their conspiracy was even larger than I had realized. Jessica wasn't just stealing my money and manipulating my son. She was running an organized elder abuse operation that targeted multiple victims simultaneously. "What about David?" I asked quietly. Agent Torres pulled out another file. "Your son owes money to 3 different gambling operations, not just Frank Castellino. His total debts exceed $120,000, has been working with Jessica for 8 months. Since before they were married. Their marriage was part of the scam. David needed to marry Jessica to give her legal standing as your daughter-in-law," Agent Coleman explained. "That relationship allows her to make medical decisions on your behalf and provides credibility when she claims to be concerned about your welfare." I felt sick. David hadn't married Jessica because he loved her. He had married her to formalize their business partnership in elder abuse. "There's something else," Agent Torres said gently. "Jessica isn't pregnant." "I know. I found David's timeline. He scheduled her medical appointment for 8 weeks from now. She's not planning to get pregnant either," Agent Coleman continued. "Jessica is already married. Her real name is Jennifer Walsh. And she's married to a man named Robert Walsh, who's currently serving time for insurance fraud. The woman I had welcomed as a daughter-in-law didn't exist. Jessica was a professional con artist with a criminal husband and a documented history of elder abuse. She had targeted my family specifically, researching our finances and vulnerabilities before orchestrating her introduction to David." "How many families has she destroyed?" I asked. "Yours would be number 7, Agent Torres replied. "She's stolen approximately $2.3 million from elderly victims over the past 4 years. $2.3 million. 7 families destroyed. Multiple elderly people imprisoned in nursing homes while Jessica and her accomplices stole their life savings. I was her latest victim, but I wouldn't be her last unless we stopped her." "What happens now?" I asked. Agent Coleman smiled. "Now we let them walk into our trap." At 10 a.m., Jessica, David, and their lawyer arrived at the courthouse for my competency hearing, confident they were about to gain legal control over my life and assets. They had no idea that Judge Morrison had been replaced by Judge Sarah Martinez, a federal judge working with the FBI investigation. Dr. Harrison testified first, presenting his fabricated medical evidence of my cognitive decline. He described the fake phone calls Jessica had made, pretending to be me, documented my supposed confusion about financial matters, and recommended immediate involuntary commitment for my own safety. Then Jessica took the stand, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law with Academy Award-worthy performance. She described my erratic behavior, my paranoid accusations about stolen money, my dangerous confusion about medications and daily activities. She painted herself as a devoted family member, trying to protect an elderly woman from her own declining mind. David testified last, reluctantly confirming that his mother was becoming increasingly unstable and needed professional care. He spoke about my accusations against Jessica, my memory problems, and my inability to manage my own finances responsibly. Their testimony was flawless. If I had been an actual dementia victim, they would have succeeded completely. Instead, Judge Martinez called a brief recess and returned with Agent Coleman, Agent Torres, and a team of federal marshals, Jessica Walsh, David Cartwright, and Dr. Richard Harrison. Judge Martinez announced, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, medical fraud, identity theft, and money laundering." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Jessica screamed that there had been some mistake, that she was the victim of a confused elderly woman's delusions. David stared in shock as federal agents placed him in handcuffs. Dr. Harrison tried to run but was tackled by marshals before he reached the door. I stood in the back of the courtroom, watching my son realize that his elderly mother had outmaneuvered his sophisticated criminal conspiracy. The woman he thought was an easy target had spent her career in military intelligence, tracking enemy operations and building cases against foreign spies. Jessica had chosen the wrong victim, Mrs. Cartwright, Agent Coleman said as the defendants were led away in handcuffs. You may have just saved dozens of future victims. Through the courthouse windows, I watched Jessica, David, and Dr. Harrison loaded into federal transport vehicles. My son looked back at me one last time, his face showing the first genuine emotion I had seen from him in months. Not anger or resentment, but the dawning realization that his actions had consequences. For 3 weeks, I had let them believe they were manipulating a confused elderly woman. Instead, I had been documenting their every move, gathering evidence, and building the case that would send them to prison. The hunted had become the hunter, the victim had become the victor. And justice, delayed but not denied, was finally being served. 6 months later, I stood in federal court watching Judge Martinez sentence the last member of the conspiracy that had tried to destroy my life. Dr. Harrison received 8 years in federal prison and permanent loss of his medical license. Linda Walsh got 3 years for her role as Jessica's accomplice in multiple elder abuse cases. Jessica herself received 15 years for running an organized criminal enterprise that had victimized dozens of elderly people across 4 states. David's sentencing had been the hardest to witness. Federal prosecutors offered him a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation in building cases against Jessica's other victims. He testified against his former wife, providing details about her methods and identifying other elderly people she had targeted. In the end, he received 4 years in federal prison and will spend 3 additional years on supervised probation. During his testimony, David finally acknowledged the full scope of what they had tried to do to me. He spoke about Jessica's manipulation, his gambling addiction, and the financial pressure that had driven him to betray his own mother. He apologized publicly, though we both knew words could never repair what he had broken between us. I convinced myself that Mom would be better off in professional care, he told the court. I told myself we were solving a problem before it became a crisis. The truth is, I was willing to sacrifice my mother's freedom to solve my own problems. I'll live with that shame for the rest of my life. The Federal Bureau of Investigation used our case to launch Operation Golden Years, a nationwide task force dedicated to investigating elder abuse schemes. Agent Coleman invited me to testify before Congress about the tactics criminals use to target elderly victims and the warning signs families should recognize. Standing at the witness table in the Capitol building, I spoke about Jessica's sophisticated manipulation techniques, Dr. Harrison's medical fraud, and the financial institutions that had failed to protect their elderly customers. My testimony helped pass the Elder Protection Act, which strengthened penalties for elder abuse and required enhanced training for bank employees who work with senior citizens. The criminals who prey on elderly Americans assume we are easy targets, I told the senators. They think our age makes us vulnerable, that our generation lacks the skills to fight back against sophisticated fraud. They are wrong. We are not helpless. We are not disposable. And we will not be silent victims. My house became the headquarters for the Cartwright Foundation for Elder Protection, a nonprofit organization I established using the settlement money from lawsuits against Dr. Harrison's medical practice and the real estate company that had conspired with Jessica. We provide free legal assistance to elderly abuse victims, fund investigations into suspected fraud cases, and teach seniors how to protect themselves from financial predators. The Foundation's most successful program is our Self-Defense for Seniors classes, where I teach other elderly people the investigative techniques I learned in military intelligence. We cover everything from documenting suspicious behavior to recognizing medical fraud to building evidence for law enforcement. My students call me Professor Rose, and many of them have used their training to expose fraud in their own families or communities. Margaret, Dr. Harrison's former receptionist, became one of our most valuable volunteers after she testified against her former employer. She helps train medical office staff to recognize signs of elder abuse and provides whistleblower support for healthcare workers who witness suspicious activities. Catherine Williams from First National Bank joined our board of directors and developed banking security protocols specifically designed to protect elderly customers from financial exploitation. Her innovations have been adopted by banks across the country. The most meaningful change in my life came from an unexpected source. 3 months after David's sentencing, I received a letter from Amy Cartwright, David's daughter from his first marriage. Amy was 25 years old and had been estranged from her father since his divorce from her mother when she was 12. "Dear Grandmother Rosemary," she wrote, "I read about Dad's arrest in the newspaper. I want you to know that not everyone in our family supported what he did to you. I've missed having you in my life." Amy and I began meeting for lunch every Sunday, slowly rebuilding the relationship Jessica and David had deliberately destroyed. Amy told me that Jessica had convinced David to cut contact with his daughter, claiming that Amy was too judgmental and would interfere with their plans. Jessica had systematically isolated David from everyone who might question her motives or protect me from her schemes. Amy brought her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, to visit me on holidays. Lily helped me plant a new garden to replace the one Jessica had destroyed. And we spent hours baking cookies while I told her stories about her grandfather, Tom. Through Amy and Lily, I discovered that family bonds built on genuine love are stronger than those based on manipulation and greed. The guest room Jessica had tried to redecorate became Lily's room, filled with toys and books and artwork from her visits. The space I had once imagined hosting grandchildren now served exactly that purpose, just not in the way I had originally planned. Dr. Harrison's replacement, Dr. Sarah Kim, became both my physician and a close friend. She reviewed all my medical records and confirmed that I had never showed any signs of cognitive decline. Dr. Harrison had fabricated every symptom he documented, creating a completely fictional medical history to support Jessica's fraud. "Your mind is as sharp as women half your age," Dr. Kim told me during my 6-month evaluation. "In fact, the stress of fighting this conspiracy probably improved your cognitive function. Nothing keeps the brain healthy like having to outwit criminals." The house Jessica had tried to steal became a gathering place for elder abuse survivors from across the region. Every month, I host support meetings in my living room, where victims share their stories and healing strategies. We call ourselves the Silver Survivors, and our motto is, "Age brings wisdom, not weakness." 1 year after the conspiracy trial ended, I received an unexpected visitor. David had been granted a temporary release to attend a pre-sentencing hearing for one of Jessica's other victims, and he asked permission to visit me before returning to federal prison. I found him waiting on my front porch, looking older than his 36 years. Prison had changed him in ways that went beyond physical appearance. The arrogance and entitlement were gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, as we sat on the porch swing Tom had built when David was a child. "I just wanted to tell you that I understand what I did now. In prison, I met other men who stole from their families, and I realized we all told ourselves the same lies." "What lies were those?" I asked. "That we deserved the money more than our victims did. That age made our parents less important than our own futures. That love meant taking care of ourselves first." David's voice broke. "I convinced myself that putting you in a nursing home was mercy, when really it was just greed." We talked for 2 hours about his gambling addiction, his marriage to Jessica, and the resentment he had carried since Tom's death. David finally acknowledged that he had blamed me for surviving the car accident because grief needed a target, and I was easier to hate than a random drunk driver. "Dad would be ashamed of me," David said as federal marshals arrived to escort him back to prison. "Your father would be proud that you're finally taking responsibility," I replied. "Shame can be the beginning of redemption if you let it teach you instead of destroying you." David returned to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence, but we began exchanging letters. Slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding some form of relationship. Not the unconditional trust of mother and child, but the cautious connection between two adults who shared history and hoped for healing. 2 years later, the foundation sponsored a national conference on elder abuse prevention in my hometown. Survivors, law enforcement officials, medical professionals, and legal advocates gathered to share resources and strategies. I gave the keynote address to 400 people, telling the story of how one elderly woman had fought back against sophisticated criminals and won. They thought my age made me weak, I concluded. They thought my generation was too trusting to recognize deception. They thought love for my son would make me accept abuse from his wife. They were wrong on every count. Age brings experience, not naivety. Love includes accountability, not blind acceptance. And trust, once broken, must be earned back through action, not just words. After the conference, Amy approached the podium with tears in her eyes. "Grandma Rose," she said, "you didn't just save yourself. You saved all of us from becoming victims." That evening, I sat in my garden watching Lily play with the neighborhood children, their laughter echoing through the yard where Tom and I had once imagined our own grandchildren playing. The house Jessica had tried to steal was full of love and life again, but built on stronger foundations than before. Jessica had tried to convince me that I was a burden, that my age made me worthless, that my remaining years were less valuable than her young ambitions. She was wrong. My 70s had become the most purposeful decade of my life. The woman who had tried to steal my future had unknowingly given me a mission that filled my days with meaning and my heart with satisfaction. I had learned that family loyalty without respect is worthless, that love without boundaries becomes enabling, and that appearing vulnerable is not the same as being powerless. Most importantly, I had discovered that the end of life's chapters can be the beginning of its greatest adventures. Standing up from my garden chair, I walked inside to prepare dinner for Amy and Lily's Sunday visit. Tomorrow, I would teach another self-defense class, counsel another abuse victim, and continue building the legacy Tom and I had always dreamed of creating together, not through biological grandchildren who might never arrive, but through the family of survivors I had chosen to serve and protect. The woman who had quietly left her own Thanksgiving dinner had found her voice, claimed her power, and changed the world for countless elderly people who deserved better than being seen as easy targets. And in saving them, I had saved myself. What would you do if you discovered that family members were plotting to steal your life savings and have you declared incompetent? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this story if it moved you. Subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary strength in impossible situations. And share this with anyone who needs to remember that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Thank you for listening to my story. And may you always have the courage to fight for your own worth when others try to diminish it.